Today. Agenda item 1, are there any apologies? Declan McAleer. Okay. Any other apologies? Agenda item 2, can I remind members of the effective questioning technique session that has been organised for the 24th of February. Members should make every effort to attend that session. That will be next week. Can I advise members that I have accepted an invitation from the Northern Ireland Meat Exporters Association to a networking dinner on the 23rd of February 2015. Agenda item 3, can I refer members to the draft minutes of the meeting held on the 10th of February 2015 at pages 6 to 11. Are members content to note draft minutes are accurate? So I will sign. Okay. Agenda item 4, Matters Arising. Can I refer members to Matters Arising at pages 15 to 86? There are a few matters that we need to decide. Can I refer you to the first item on page 15 regarding a letter from DARD on the Fisheries Task Force? Is this information sufficient, or would members prefer an oral briefing post-Easter? I think the
Chairman Kieran isn't here, and he probably would be.
Yeah, see, he's not. That's why I was looking over there to see. I think the information that was received is quite scant, so I think we need either more information or else an oral briefing. So, members, we have an oral briefing, or do we look more information? What's members? Oral briefing. Okay. The next matter I want you to draw your attention to is at page 78. The committee staff have been provided with a highly confidential copy of the outline business case for the DARD headquarter relocation to Kelly. Because it is confidential, staff are not able to include in the electronic pack. It is suggested that we have a closed session briefing on this post-Easter. Are members content with the suggestion? Yeah.
Post-Easter, Chair, then that's put away then?
It's the other side of Easter, but look at that. But a full copy of the outline business case can be viewed on the committee staff, at the committee staff office. At this stage. Okay. I'm not so sure now, telling up in here, this suggested to have a closed session briefing.
Chair, I have no difficulty with a closed session actually, which is probably helpful, but timing's
the problem, yeah. Seems we look at that again, see can
I would I think it's important to give that as soon as possible.
Members content to action the matters arising as suggested on the index sheet at pages 13 and 14. Remember? Agenda item 5. We have an oral briefing. DARD and AFBI strategic plan and estate. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at page 88 to 91? And papers from the department at pages 92 to 102. Can I ask members to note that the paper from AFBI is at various places. AFBI headquarters relocation and plant science centre at Lacall, but we'll get this clarified in a minute, but we believe that this does not mean that the headquarters will be relocated to Lacall, but that the headquarters will be relocated to a site not yet chosen, and that plant science will go to Lacall. But we'll get that clarified in a second. Can I welcome Professor Seamus Kennedy, AFBI Chief Executive, Dr. Sinclair Main, Departmental Scientific Officer, and Dr. Stanley Madole, AFBI Senior Veterinary Research Officer. Can you welcome you to the committee? And I asked you to take up to 10 minutes for your brief, and then we'll ask some questions. Okay.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the invitation for us to appear before the committee. You've introduced my colleagues, and just to add to that, Sinclair Main is the Director of our Sustainable Agri-Food Sciences Division. Stanley Madole is the Director of our Veterinary Sciences Division. The other member of our Executive Management Team, Mrs Leslie Hogg, unfortunately couldn't be here today, and Leslie is Director of her Finance and Corporate Affairs Division. Just in terms of the background to AFBI, and I'm sure all members are aware of it, AFBI was set up as an NDPB in April 2006 following the O'Hare Review of Education and R&D in Agriculture and Food Science in Northern Ireland. The outcome was the introduction of a customer-contractor separation between DARD as policy customer and AFBI as science contractor. DARD, in fact, is AFBI's sponsor department and also its main customer. But AFBI also carries out work for a wide range of local, national and international customers. The Institute is just under 800 staff located at 7 specialist sites in Northern Ireland and also operates a 53-metre marine research vessel on the Irish Sea. The Institute carries out an annual work programme for the department covering statutory testing, diagnostic surveillance testing, specialist advice and R&D under DARD's evidence and innovation strategy. AFBI provides scientific services across a broad range of areas including animal health and welfare, plant health, the environment, sustainable agricultural systems, food innovation and food safety, marine and freshwater fisheries and ecosystems, and agri-food and rural economics. Examples of the type of work we carry out include testing in the laboratory for BSE, tuberculosis, brucellosis, the research that underpins the derogation under the Nitrates Directive, the marine fish stock data that feed into the annual negotiations in Brussels on fish quotas each year, and the socio-economic research on topics such as the potential impact of climate legislation on the local agri-food industry. Provision of an effective local emergency response to incidents that threaten animal or plant health, the feed or food chain and the environment is an important part of AFBI's work to protect local industry. And examples of this response include the development and application of tests for the several new forest diseases that have emerged over the past few years, the dioxin feed contamination incident in 2008-2009 and the blue tongue virus incursion in 2008. In the latter case, for example, AFBI's scientific testing and advice to the department was instrumental in helping the industry to avoid costs of approximately £25 million per year through not having to introduce vaccination for blue tongue or animal movement controls. In many ways, provision of this type of local emergency response capability is a form of insurance policy for the local industry. As referred to in the AFBI strategy paper before the committee, the Institute has grown its income outside grant and aid from around £6 million in its first year of existence to a current level of around £18.5 million. It is testament to the expertise and drive of AFBI staff that this amount is now around 1/3 of total income, and it underpins a large proportion of our scientific capacity and also reduces the cost to the public purse of operating AFBI. AFBI's strategic vision to 2020 is to be an internationally recognised centre of excellence in areas of strategic importance to the Northern Ireland agri-food industry and government, particularly in the context of the Going for Growth report. However, this strategy will inevitably be heavily influenced by the scale and speed of the current budget cuts. AFBI's response to those budget pressures is to reduce costs even further and to grow external income even further as much as we possibly can, while also working with DARD to prioritise the work that it requires from AFBI, and that process is ongoing. Delivery of savings on the scale required can only be achieved in the short term by reducing AFBI's workforce substantially. A figure of 275 staff to exit voluntarily in 2015-16 out of a total workforce of just under 800 is quoted in the paper we have submitted to you. However, it's important to note that this is dependent on having the required number of volunteers for exiting, the availability of funding from the public sector Storm and House Agreement funding that is made available, and the capacity of Civil Service Pensions Branch to process the proposed large number of voluntary exits from the public sector. However, by 2018, it's anticipated that a further 125 staff will have to leave AFBI due to a steep reduction in royalty income. And it's estimated at the moment that the overall effect of these cuts will be a reduction in AFBI's workforce by 50% which would seriously challenge the Institute's ability to remain a world-class centre of excellence. It's AFBI's aim to grow income to such an extent and reduce costs as much as possible that a reduction in workforce of that magnitude does not actually come to pass. Apart from the staff budget, the next major area of potential cost reduction is in estate costs. AFBI inherited its leased estate from Dard Science Service and the former Agricultural Research Institute at Hillsborough. Many of the buildings are old and costly to maintain. For example, our headquarters at Newforge Lane was built to accommodate the School of Agriculture and Food Science in Queen's University when it was operated by Dard Science Service. As well as being inefficient, that site is too large for AFBI's needs. The VSD, Veterinary Sciences Building at Stormont, is in a poor state of repair, and some of our animal research accommodation at Hillsborough is antiquated. The estate paper we have submitted to you summarises some of the main issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your presentation. In relation to AFBI's cut up in around 26%, how does that stand in comparison with the other parts of the department? I mean, the overall Dard cut, I think, somewhere around 4%. It seems that AFBI's getting a very large cut for their remit.
I think proportionally across the public sector, probably we're one of the hardest hit overall. I saw a figure of 15% quoted for the Dard cut, and that related to a cut of £29.9 million. But I'm not, I must say, I'm not totally au fait with those figures for the department.
You're saying by 2018 up to 50% of staff under the current proposals would have to go. This would, I am sure, seriously undermine AFBI's position and their ability to do the research that's needed. What impact do you think that will have on the Going for Growth, for instance?
Well, we think in terms of our ability to contribute to the innovation agenda which is necessary to achieve the Going for Growth targets, that it will have a major adverse impact, because we would only be half the size of the Institute. And we would assume in that scenario that the department and AFBI would prioritise statutory testing, which would mean that apart from natural reductions in statutory testing, such as due to the anticipated downturn in brucellosis testing, would remain of a significant size. So in effect, the cuts would probably hit R&D disproportionately more than the statutory testing. So it is a serious concern for us.
In relation to the proposal that the AFBI headquarters is relocated, can you tell us more about that, or has there been a decision on where that will be relocated to at this stage?
No, there has been no decision on where the headquarters for Newforge Lane will be relocated to. The business cases, outline business cases, are being developed. A number of options are being considered, but those will all be subject to the final outcome of the options appraisal, covering obviously financial issues and non-financial issues as well. But if I could just refer to one of the comments you made in your introduction, where one of the options is not to relocate the headquarters to Loughgall.
Okay, it's just the way it was worded here.
Yeah, apologies for that.
But okay, yeah. It could be picked up wrong very quickly. So in effect what you're saying, if these cuts go ahead, it will seriously impact on AFBI's ability to deliver frontline services. That's what you're saying? Yeah, okay. Joanne Dobson.
Thank you, Chair. Can I thank you for your briefing? You tell us that in 2014-2015 you had commercial income, or as you described, Seamus, as non-Dard income of £19.1 million. How much of that was from non-government sources?
I can give you a rough breakdown of that income. The figures I have here are for 13-14. Obviously, the 14-15 year is not finished yet. Out of that income for 13-14, we had 6.8 million from vaccine royalties, 3.1 million from government departments. Now, that would include departments such as the DOE, DCAL, and also DEFRA.
Our department, yeah.
So it's not entirely Northern Ireland departments. Commercial income, which is mainly from Northern Ireland, but not exclusively, because some of it is international as well, was about 5.3 million. EU R&D was about 955,000. Other R&D, apart from the European Union, was about 1.2 million. We have farm income of just under $1 million. That's sales of milk and livestock from our farms. And then there was roughly 200,000 from other work, a bit more, including charter of the ship.
So what have you been doing to increase your availability to private companies to help offset the budget reductions being faced across government agencies? Because I note you said in your briefing your aim was to grow external income even further. So what practical measures have you taken to achieve this?
Well, we plan to grow our income along a number of fronts, not just commercial companies, because maintaining the research base is extremely important. European Union Horizon 2020 is a big target for us. This year already we've had 9 bids in. I've referred to those in the paper, but I must qualify it. I've referred to us winning 2 bids. One of those was actually a Marie Curie fellowship. It's not actually technically Horizon 2020. We are planning at least at the moment another 9 bids to go in this year, and hopefully considerably more than that. That work has been assisted by the appointment last year of a DARD-funded Northern Ireland contact person for agri-food, who has done tremendous work out in Brussels, liaising with local companies and Queen's University and the University of Ulster as other research providers in putting together potential proposals and making our staff and AFBI aware of what the opportunities are. We also work closely with NICO in terms of international business development. We're exploring opportunities with organisations such as Genome Canada, where we have several grant applications in at the minute, because we recognise that the pot of money available in Northern Ireland for investment in agri-food innovation is decreasing. So we as an institute either decrease or we look further afield, and that's a major part of our strategy. Secretary?
If I could just comment, Chairman, thank you. I think the important point to highlight is that the non-government funding is extremely competitive, and particularly in relation to EU funding. The success rate in the first year of Horizon 2020 is around 14%. And really, to be effective in competing in that sort of environment, it's critical you have a strong national platform on which to build. And we are at a significant disadvantage in Northern Ireland in relation to the underinvestment in agri-food R&D, which is about a third of the equivalent investment made by Scotland and about half the investment in agri-food R&D in the Republic. So without a strong local platform, it really is very difficult to build up the skills and expertise to allow you to compete effectively in the European, and indeed we're also competing in the UK environment. So I think there is a real danger here that a contraction in local R&D also significantly limits our ability to bring in external funding for R&D. And for example, in both the South and in Scotland and England, we're seeing significant increased investment, and they're justifying that on the basis of their ability to draw down more external EU funding. So I think there is a real concern here about as we contract in the core and reduce our ability, then we're also going to put at risk the very significant external funding that we're currently bringing in.
Very valid point. I was going to ask you then, has your private income been rising, falling or staying the same? So you're saying it is increasingly more difficult to get that with. We need to retain that expertise in research and development too.
It's certainly very competitive, and we're seeing that it's the institutes and countries who are investing in R&D nationally that are able to mount a very effective and submit very effective bids into a competitive environment. And, for example, it's a very clear ambition in the Republic for Science Foundation Ireland and for DAFN to invest, and they've been quite open about this in terms of saying they are investing in their agri-food centres to allow increased drawdown. We have the UK Agri-Tech Strategy, which is about building platforms of excellence. Again, we're competing into those bids at a UK level, but those are very much based around developing national expertise to allow more competitive bids into an internationally competitive environment.
That leads me on to my next point, which the Chair touched on earlier. And you did describe that's a major issue, the loss of royalties in 2018, which you've said, Seamus, would impact on potentially 125 jobs. So the Chair touched on the fact that how will this impact reducing staff by 50%? So what impact then do you feel that staffing numbers being reduced by that significant number will have on your ability then to seek additional non-government and commercial business?
It will reduce it substantially because, obviously a big reduction in the number of staff, particularly those who are earning external income at the minute, will obviously make it much harder to grow income.
And would you be concerned then at the potential loss of expertise?
Absolutely. Well, that's another issue. Been through any massive exit scheme, it's going to be a blunt instrument, no matter how we try best. But obviously, we want to retain the top-level skills that we have within the organisation. Whenever you talk about exits, obviously it's effect on staff morale, and people, sometimes then start looking for other jobs. But even apart from that, when we start trying to identify the numbers of staff that we need on the scale we need to exit, it's almost inevitable, no matter how we fine-tune the scheme, that we're going to lose skills.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Yeah, Tom Buchanan.
Thank you, Chair. And again, can I commend, first of all, AFBE on the work that they do. But can anyone explain to me why that AFBE are being asked by 2018 to take a staff cut of 50%? And the likes of CAFRE, as my understanding, they're cutting staff somewhere around 10%, and within the department itself is somewhere around 7%. There seems to be a big disparity here. What's the reason behind this? What's the reason that AFBE has been asked to take such a huge cut and lost so many staff, which are of so vital importance, if you like, to the agriculture industry?
Well, I suppose there are a number of elements that make up budget pressures on AFBE. One is the reduction in grant and aid from the department. There's also the issue of pay progression. We have to find money to pay the increases, the normal civil service equivalent increases in pay each year. And the department has given us some support, and for next year they're giving us some support to that. But it's only about a third of the 3 million roughly we need. There's general inflation costs as well. So when you take inflation, the pay progression costs, the cuts in grant and aid, that mounts up to a huge amount. And then by the time we get to 2018, when the royalties drop off considerably, that really compounds the issue. So those are the main elements.
Well, there's no doubt it's going to have a serious effect on AFBE's ability to deliver, in a sense, in the way that they have been doing. And I suppose my concern, and I have been, I've got a response from you, and I've pressed this to the Minister too when she's been here. My concern is for the laboratory in Omagh, and I know this is a constituency issue, but at the same time, it's the only laboratory of its type west of the Bann, outside of Belfast. And therefore, it's going to have a real detrimental effect on the farming community if it is the case that has to close. I can't get no answers either from the Minister or from you folk as to what's going to happen on that, because I'm told us all in the mix. But I want to put the marker down here today that if that closes, it's going to have serious detrimental effects for the people west of the Bann, because if anyone there has an animal and a few animals and something happens to them and they die or whatever, they're not going to cart them to Belfast to get them looked at or whatever, to get them see what the problem is. And that's going to cut out the entire west of Northern Ireland from a service that's so vitally important to the agriculture community and that wide rural area. So, you know, I want to make a plea here again today. Let's try and ensure that we hold this in the midst of all of this mix of cutbacks that's coming to the coming to AFBI. And again, I do express a grave concern at the fact that, you know, AFBI is cutting 50% of staff. And you know, I'm not blaming you folk, but you know, they're taking 50% of a cut, whereas some of these other organisations within the department are taking a much lesser cut, and I think that should be balanced out a lot more, rather than the huge disparity that we have.
Okay. Joe Byrne.
Thanks, Chairman. Again, I welcome the three gentlemen from AFBI presentation, Seamus, Stanley and Sinclair. In relation to the strategic crossroads that you're at, there's a mixture of the physical infrastructure and the state, there's the human resource and sort of intellectual capacity. Which are you going to rationalise first? Is it going to be the estate, or is it going to be the technical and professional staffing, or are you going to try and marry the two together at one time?
Unfortunately, it has to be the staffing side of things, because the lead-in time, you know, for construction of alternative accommodation, you know, is so long that we're probably talking about 2020 before we would have any new buildings, assuming we have the capital or can acquire the capital for the redevelopment. But with the current budget pressures, they won't wait that long.
Well, then, if you're going to concentrate, Seamus, on the short term because of the external shock, i.e. the budget cut, obviously you have to prioritise which sort of research, and for both the animal research and the food and plant research. Where do you think you're coming down on balance? Are you going to try and shave every part, or are you going to prioritise?
We're determined in AFBI that we don't shave every part, because we think that will just make us, you know, jack of all trades, masters of none. And as Sinclair has alluded to earlier, if you want to be competitive in winning external R&D funding internationally, you've got to be strong in particular areas. So part of that mix of prioritisation will have to be us prioritising areas that we believe we can remain strong in and competitive. And as I said earlier on, the statutory testing, BSE testing, TB testing, etc., has to be a priority because there are statutory obligations there. But our concern is that it will be the R&D innovation side that will be disproportionately hit.
If I could just comment there as well, I think, as Seamus has already mentioned, I think prioritisation is absolutely critical, also in the research and development area, because it's about critical mass. And if we try to maintain everything, then we end up with small units that aren't effective. So we will have to make hard decisions in the light of the budget reductions in terms of which areas are retained. And obviously that's an ongoing discussion with DARD. What are the priorities for the future, particularly around going for growth? And it will mean we will have to stop doing research in a number of other areas because we no longer have the budget or the staff to allow those areas to be undertaken. So that will mean there will be significant areas of the industry where there will be no local research and development to support those sectors.
Chairman, that's helpful. In relation then to that commercial R&D for the food, do you anticipate therefore concentrating a resource in a particular area or two, or can you get into collaboration either with Scotland or with the Republic to try and advance the case to retain some sort of national R&D for food science?
Collaboration is critically important because research is so complex now, it's so expensive that the days when any single institute can work on their own are gone. We have extensive collaborative links with Teagasc in the Republic, for example, SRUC, other organisations in Great Britain, Scottish Regional University College in Scotland. We're developing those. We have recently joined a partnership called Farming Futures, which involves a number of research organisations in Great Britain. Sinclair referred to the UK Agri-Tech Strategy, and part of our aim there is to try and work with those organisations to draw down more funding from that. We have one application in at the minute, which we believe, touch wood, is going to be very successful. So international collaborations, local, national collaborations and partnerships are critical to all of this.
Thanks. And lastly, Chairman, and I want to support what Tom said earlier on about trying to retain this physical facility in the West regarding sort of service to both the farming community and the veterinary science people that do want to have animals post mortem examinations or whatever. In relation to the expertise that you want to retain, how can you manage cutting the workforce by 50% and trying to retain the critical mass and the specialisms that are going to be needed to concentrate the focus that you want to develop and enhance?
With extreme difficulty. Our staff have civil service terms and conditions, so we have to apply the overall terms of a voluntary exit scheme, a civil service voluntary exit scheme, but tailor it as much as possible to our own local circumstances. And I suppose one of the differences of AFBI from the mainstream public sector is the high degree of specialism within the organisation. We have economists, we have soil scientists, we have animal scientists, etc. And you can't just, turn one into the other overnight. So that's a big, big challenge.
Personal expertise in individuals, apart from the post for which they hold responsibility. Okay, Chairman, I would like to say that I'm in support of AFBI and the management and staff, and would want to see them survive and grow and rationalise in a meaningful but effective way of the future of the industry.
Yeah. Tom Elliott.
Chair, thanks. Thank you for the presentation. Clarification first, just on the 36.4 million is a DARD grant. Do you actually charge DARD separately for individual work, or do they just give you that block grant and say you work with that and whatever we give you? Or how does that?
Well, they give us the grant and aid basically, and we have itemised all the work that we carry out for DARD, so that there's a list and a price attached to each one. So that accounts for the grant and aid. There's a small number of projects that might arise during the course of the year, for example, where DARD wanted a special project done, and they would pay for that outside grant and aid, so they would give us extra funding. But again, because of the pressure on their budget, the number of those projects is decreasing all the time.
And how did they come up with that figure for that grant and aid, around your itemised work?
Well, we supply the costs of it, and DARD, I suppose, take that, and they also work from their available budget. And there's an iterative process to try and get the two to match.
Is that a big job, getting the two to match?
It's generally, there's a lot of work on it, yes.
Because I'm assuming they're not going to know the level of testing or the amount of work that you're actually going to be required to do during the year.
There's some variation in the amount of TB testing. Nobody can predict the number of TB reactors, just as one example. So there is a bit of variation in the work, and there has to be. But our big concern is this year, 15-16, that we will not be able to carry out, anything like the work programme that we carried out last year. We were only able to complete last year's work programme because DARD found some extra money towards the end of the year, which allowed us to continue the work programme. But this year the pressure is even greater.
I think, I was just going to say, I think it's also important to highlight that the work programme changes from year to year. For example, in 14-15, when we costed all of the elements of the statutory and diagnostic programme, there was no capacity left for new research and development projects. So in the current financial year, no new research was commissioned because of the constraints already on the budget this year. And clearly that's going to be an even greater difficulty going into 15-16. So as Seamus has highlighted earlier, the danger is that as we continue to see these budget reductions, we become more of a statutory and testing organisation and less research and development, because that's already been pruned very severely.
So that necessary work of testing would have to continue, but the R&D would be reduced. Okay. Did you receive any of that through EU funding?
Which money?
Any of the commercial money?
Yeah,
or from other government departments through funding?
We've, it's about $1 million roughly. It goes up and down each year, but thereabouts from the European Union in terms of R&D.
The royalties, I notice you're saying that some of those may disappear. Explain that. Why is that?
The major chunk of royalties is associated with patents for a pig vaccine, which is sold by a commercial company, and patents have a 20-year expiry. So the 20 years is up in 2018, thereabouts.
All right, so that's why it's really that one particular. And can there be a renewal of that royalty? No.
We don't think so, but we're not sure. Well, there's patents of a 20-year lifespan normally. There is provision for medical and animal health products sometimes for a slight extension. So the company may get protection a little bit longer, but we may not get a royalty stream from that because technically the patent, and actually the patent will have expired.
And there's, but what I mean is that can't be renewed, that actually patent can't be renewed?
No, you can't renew a patent because when it comes to the end of its life, others can enter the market and produce the product, you know, after the patent expires. There's a potential that there may be other patents, but we have no information that any of those other patents would produce income to us, you know, at all.
Okay. Chair, one other issue just, and that was around the Public Accounts Committee criticism, not charging enough. I'm assuming that's a difficult issue because you're in the commercial world. Were your rates not set broadly at a commercial rate?
They were. The difficulty is we're obliged to charge full economic cost, and as far as we understand it, our main competitor, public sector research organisations, are not obliged to charge full economic cost. They can operate more on a marginal basis, and that's where we are finding ourselves becoming uncompetitive. For some of our customers, like AgResearch, the farmer levy body, for example, are telling us, oh, we can get this work done cheaper across the water, for example, or down south. So there's a big risk to us there.
Why can your system not change to do that the same as they're doing it and not take full economic?
We're working with the department to produce a proposal to go to the Department of Finance and Personnel on that point. We are bound by managing public money in Northern Ireland, and one part of that booklet says that organisations should charge full economic cost. But there's another section of the booklet which says if you have spare capacity, try and recover something. I'm paraphrasing now, but it's not prescriptive in terms of how much you have to recover. We understand totally if we're carrying out work for a commercial company, that should be full economic cost.
Yeah.
But when we're carrying out work for other public sector bodies, there's an issue. There's also the big issue that European funding, for example, doesn't pay full economic cost because it's not meant to pay for all the costs of research for a member state. It's meant to make a contribution. So every time we win a European project, we have to use some of our grant and aid for the shortfall funding.
Finally, Chair, just a brief one on working with the universities. How much cooperative working is there with the local universities?
Quite a bit, particularly with Queen's University, because Queen's don't have field facilities like AFBI does, so a lot of our Queen's projects and AFBI projects are collaborative, basically based on utilising a lot of the capacity we have in AFBI.
Would it be a big market or not?
I couldn't put a value on the total number of projects, but we have a considerable number of projects.
Okay. Oliver McMullen.
Thank you, Sharon. Thank you for the presentation. Most of the answer to what I was thinking of. You said you had to stop research in other areas. What were they?
This in relation to Sinclair's comment about last year. We basically had to stop quite a lot of research across the board temporarily because we were running out of money. We weren't able, in order to reach the 31st of March, to produce a balanced budget. We couldn't afford to actually buy the chemicals and consumables that were necessary to do the work. But then we were just over £2 million short, but the department were able to grant us another £2 million, and that we're working on that at the minute to get us through to the 31st of March.
What do you see as a figure that would keep you buoyant, happy, whatever way you want to look at it? As a force out there, in the international world.
Well, at the minute, our deficit for 15-16 is estimated at £7.5 million. That's where we're short at the minute. And as I said earlier, it's unfortunate that we have to hit our staff budget, in order to, try and make up that, as well as reducing costs wherever we can.
Hey, that drawing I have on the thing there of the 7 or 8 sites, is that all your sites?
There's 7 sites, yeah.
You do other sites?
No.
They all need it.
Well, they all do specialist work.
Yeah.
We could go around all the sites and summarise what they do, but they're all busy doing what they do. So there's 2 veterinary sites, obviously, as has been referred to earlier. One at Stormont, one at Omagh. There's the Hillsborough Research Farm. There's Knockgall, which is essentially work on plants, grass breeding, mushrooms, apples, beef research, agroforestry. Crossnacreevy, which is essentially a plant testing station, and it's an official plant testing station, and also carries out arable research. Newforge has a mixture of activities: food science, environmental science, fisheries science, and there's a small unit up in Bush Mills that carries out salmon work. I hope I haven't missed any there.
I've looked at where they can share space, all of that there. Is that possible?
Well, it's recognised that the costs of the Athby estate are far too high, and one of the big issues is the size and the age of our Newforge site. It's very expensive. It's far too big, more than we need. The buildings were kind of a prefab construction whenever they were built, so they're hard to heat, etc., etc. So we could make big inroads with replacing that building. The veterinary building, the main building up at Stony Road, was built away in the 60s. The roof is crumbling. There's all sorts of problems with it. It's expensive to run.
Yes.
So we make big inroads there. Some of our animal accommodation at Hillsborough, beef accommodation, is very old. We have to grape in silage, for example, so there could be efficiencies there in terms of running costs of a modern building.
But these are very much longer term.
Okay.
These are not things that we address.
Do you ever do a programme looking at the long term? What?
We have an estate strategy ongoing at the moment. I think a lot of this, as Seamus has said, is the legacy of what we inherited when Athby was created in 2006. It was a very diverse site and a range of I think if we were redesigning Athby from a blank sheet today, it would be entirely different. But we have an estates programme board with DAR, jointly with the department, where we're looking at all of these. And certainly there are a number of options being looked at in terms of rationalising the number of sites, and I think there's no doubt there will be a reduction in the number of sites in the future to try and get a more fit-for-purpose estate to control the costs in the longer term.
I think the other thing in terms of sites is the sites vary incredibly in terms of size. Effectively, there's 3 major sites, and some of the sites are very small. Bush Mills is 4 people. Omagh is in the region of 16, 17 still. And it's only there to provide the geographical coverage.
And the Athby estate work has been taken forward as part of DARD's overall estate strategy, so it's integrated into that.
Okay, thank you very much for your report.
Blood in again before Tom comes back in. Ian?
All right, thanks, Chair. You're saying there, that if you had to do it again, you do it all differently. Yet with all, there's 4 sites here has been identified there for replacement or whatever, right? The question I'd asked, that part of if you had it, if you were to do it again, is this the answer?
Well, it's an interesting question, because one of the issues that we have considered recently is we talked about veterinary labs, for example. We have one in the east, one in the west, and that's why there are two. But what if you had one in the middle? So if we were starting again, that would definitely be, I think, how you would do it, without a doubt, in terms of veterinary.
I'm just conscious there, that the 4 sites that have been identified, I take it that they're all east of the band, and I was going to ask a question earlier, but Tom has it covered, like, if you're talking about long-term planning here, you definitely need to be thinking in terms of centralising, if you like, all these different departments, I'd imagine, right? And the point that I made here about these 4 replacement dwellings, or buildings, right? Could contrary to that outlook. And if that was the case, then this would be a waste of money. And
yeah, I suppose that if we take the history of the Stormont site, which we have 280 people employed. That started in 1924 in an old farm outhouse, literally. It grew up and grew up. Over the years, there was more investment, and the more that was invested, the harder it ever was for people, even though they realised it was in the wrong place, to change it. And the last tier of major investment was 10, 15 years ago, when we spent about £8–9 million on a containment laboratory. So with each successive wave of investment, it's wet as the ground. But the AFBI board is now, actually alive to that and is considering, well, what if we just went back to the white canvas, and is there a better way to do it? So and now is a critical time to do that for the veterinary one, because the DSD main building, there's no doubt we need that replaced. But it's a perfect opportunity to consider, well, do we need it replaced somewhere else, or should we replace it somewhere else?
But there are some founders against complete centralisation. For example,
what would those be?
For example, in terms of some of the veterinary work, there's biosecurity and containment issues. Think very seriously as to whether you want a site that's dealing with potentially with exotic pathogens located, for example, on somewhere like Hillsborough, which has a large animal population. So there are some considerations like that that would say it may be actually better to keep those two things separate.
All right. Thanks very much, Chair.
Well, can I say that as a farmer myself and someone that has farmed for many years, I think AFBI is vital to the future of the industry, both horticulture and agriculture, and I think it's very important that if we're going to have a vibrant industry into the future, if we cut off the hand that feeds you, if you cut off an AFBI research industry, that science lab that is doing a lot of work, and for instance, Loughgall beside me, on grass seed and grass, for instance, some of those produce some of the best grasses maybe anywhere in Europe. We have 2 local industries in Loughgall, in the Loughgall synonymous with Loughgall area, and that's with apples and mushrooms. And certainly we would want to see research and AFBI continuing in that regard. In relation to Loughgall, it's just 2 miles from where I live, so in relation to Loughgall and the apples, mushrooms and grass seed, have you any plans at this stage in regard to those?
Well, what we'd like to do is sweat our assets wherever possible, particularly in terms of mushrooms and apples, because they are small sectors and it's a small research activity, and sectors refer to the need to have critical mass. We've had discussions with Teagasc recently in the south to see if there's any possibility of them potentially using Loughgall for some R&D projects, and we got a very favourable initial reception, and we're following that up with setting up a working group. Likewise, are there institutes in GB that could avail of those facilities? Because every institute's under the same type of funding problems, and if one institute has a particular set of facilities, the more we can leverage in on the basis of that, the better. The grass breeding is extremely successful, and thank you for your comments. And in many ways, it's one of the jewels in AFBI's crown. We do not want to threaten that in any way.
Yes, and I mean, certainly we have a Grown for Growth strategy. We want to grow the industry. One thing we're good at in Northern Ireland is producing food, and I had grave concerns about the disproportionate cut to AFBI, and it's something this committee, I think, in general, will have concern about. It's something we'll, after this leave, we'll discuss. Any other member wants to ask a question? Or yourself, Edwin Poots?
Just on it, and perhaps this has been covered. In terms of the cut, obviously you're going to have to make significant reductions in the workforce, and that's how would that spread out if you had to make what is being asked of you at this moment in time?
Well, we're anticipating that with current budget projections we'll have to lose half our workforce by 2018. Now we're working with the department to prioritise the work areas that the department wish us to carry out for them, as well as AFBI, carrying out work for other customers. That process is not finished, but as I mentioned earlier, that we have a large amount of statutory testing, which is a priority. So by the time you reduce your workforce, carry out the statutory testing, there will be relatively little left for R&D, essentially.
Are you talking about tens of jobs or hundreds of jobs?
Well, we're talking about 400 jobs by 2018. That's our projection at the minute, simply to balance the budget.
And that would obviously have an impact on, as William was saying, Loughgall, but Hillsborough, Omagh, Cross McCreevy.
It will have an impact on all our work at all sites, and that review with the department to prioritise the work, is not complete yet.
And AFBI has been, in more recent years in particular, selling a lot of its work on a worldwide basis, and to some extent it's like an export business. You're selling intelligence at that point. How capable will you be of maintaining that kind of service and ensuring that you can actually create employment in Northern Ireland through scientific expertise in agriculture, whilst living within the sort of budget constraints that you have?
It won't be easy, because if we're going to downsize to half the organisation, obviously it will have an impact on our business to do our ability, capacity to do international business. So all areas of AFBI will be affected.
Yeah.
I think it's also important to highlight that we are contracting whilst our competitors in the agri-food industry in Great Britain and in the Republic are actually increasing their investment in R&D in order to grow their industry, to make their industry as more competitive and innovative, and allow them to increasingly access international funding. So certainly from a research perspective, and my division is primarily an R&D division, I'm very concerned that not only are we going to take a step backwards in terms of research, but the industry as a whole will be in a much less competitive place in 4 to 5 years' time, because the flow of research means that the research that's being done today actually only delivers normally in 4 or 5 years' time. So the short-term impact might be relatively small, but the longer-term impact, the grass breeding programme, for example, that the Chair referred to, the varieties that we have coming through today, started their life 20 years ago. So it was the investment made 20 years ago that now places AFBI as a world-leading grass breeding organisation with top varieties across the UK, Ireland and even into Europe. So if we stop that flow of research funding, the impact is not just short-term, but it's over a much longer period and much greater impacts on the industry.
And there are very good figures linking economic development with the amount of investment in R&D and agri-food from several countries.
Chair, it's very concerning whenever you say it will have an impact on the industry. So, what I've been concentrating on is the impact on AFBI, which would appear to be devastating in terms of even its future credibility. If you lose 400 staff, you're bound to lose a lot of top quality people at that point, and the credibility of the organisation would be damaged as a consequence of that. And I don't like saying that, but that's just a reality. Where we'll go there. But if you're talking about actual damage to the industry, it's hard to say how this fits with going for growth. You just referred to the work that's been done on grass species there, and we're known to produce quality beef and quality milk, and we've been urged to maximise that from grass. Now, how do we manage going for growth? How do we make the Northern Ireland industry competitive against the likes of New Zealand? Because we're coming through a difficult point of time with milk. How do we actually manage our milk costs if we don't have the skill base to actually advise and do that research and come back to farmers and say, if you do the following here in Northern Ireland, you can reduce your cost base or manage your cost base better whilst getting greater production?
Yeah, that's a major challenge. And you refer to grass. I mean, about 90% of our agricultural industry is based on grass. And the grass that's sown in Northern Ireland by farmers, a large proportion of it is AFBI bred grass, with higher productivity year on year.
Just at that point for 70 acres of it this year, Mr. Chairman, but you can see that the species of grass now, it's producing far greater tonnages per hectare than was previously the case. And that doesn't happen by accident, and it doesn't happen by purely leaving it to the industry either.
Well, as Sinclair said, it takes a long time, but it also takes skills, and we're very fortunate enough that we have excellent grass breeding skills, and maintaining skills will be a big challenge in all of this, because it takes a long time to grow the skills, but if you lose them, it takes a long, long time to get them back again.
And is Cross na Creevy not sustainable under this sort of proposal?
Well, we're reviewing all the work in AFBI at all our sites, and no decisions have been made yet.
Cindy Emerson.
Thank you, Chairman. Apologies for being late attending another meeting. Just in the back of what Mr. Pooch says there, you talk about from now to 2018 and the reductions and in R&D. Is there any possibility that work being done from now to 2018, that work is not going to be productive at the end of 2018 due to, is this a progressive reduction to 2018? That being the case, going back to the R&D side of it, is there possibly work being done now and up to 2018 where at the end of the day it will maybe be proven to be lost?
Well, I mean, the nature of R&D is that it's a speculative process. So even if we allow all R&D to take its process, our job is sometimes to actually find out things that farmers shouldn't be doing and to avoid farmers going down the wrong path in terms of a particular technology. So that can be as important as actually a breakthrough in terms of a new technology. But I think certainly there is I think we have a number of long-term strategic projects where we are looking at, for example, monitoring water quality in Lough Neagh, very important in terms of the Nitrates Directive, and has been absolutely critical in allowing Northern Ireland to apply for a derogation and, in fact, to argue for, if you like, shorter closed periods than would otherwise be the case, some research that was undertaken last year. So certainly some of the long-term strategic projects, grass breeding is one, we have a number of other areas. There is a long-term investment, and stopping that work now would mean certainly would have significant implications in terms of access to that information thereafter.
Touching on further on down the line, it would be much greater probably to pick up on it again.
Well, I think that...
Or could you sort of bank that and say, look, well,
I think the biggest issue, as Seamus and Stanley have already mentioned, it's the expertise.
Yeah.
We have scientists science is a pipeline. You have younger scientists who are being trained by the older scientists, and hopefully those skills are passing on. If we lose scientific capacity in some of these critical areas, it will be virtually impossible to rebuild that again, and that's a permanent withdrawal from some of those areas. And that's why our whole decision-making in discussion with DARD about deciding what are the absolutely critical areas we must have in the future is very important, that we retain core skills in those areas. But some other areas, given the extent of the reductions, we will have to withdraw, and it'll be very, very difficult to develop expertise in those in future years.
would R&D be one of the ones, or would it be sort of, as you said, maybe right across the board? But is R&D likely to suffer more than most in the department?
Almost certainly, because of the statutory requirements to do keep doing the testing. So proportionately, the cuts would have to hit the R&D side of the house more.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you.
Can I thank you very much for the presentation? Can I say in closing that I believe that these proposals are totally disproportionate. I think it will have a detrimental effect on the long-term future of the industry and on the going for growth strategy. And we as a committee will, after his leave, will look at what we think we should do to try and help. But thank you very much again for your presentation.
Thank you.
Obvious. Thank you. Committee members, I feel we should write to the Minister on this issue and state our serious concerns on the disproportionate level of cuts that AFBI is having to take. And when you look at the cut in the total agriculture department budget's 4%, they're taking a 26% cut. The future of our entire industry and in the long term can be affected, and I believe that we should write a strong letter to the Minister, and I want maybe the views of the rest of the committee on that.
Chairman, I agree with you. I think it's a pretty sobering presentation we've had, and for the first time we've got a critical breakdown of the disproportionate cuts that's going to happen to the R&D section, given that they will have to continue with the statutory testing in relation to farm animals. And I think it is very regrettable that it is likely to have very catastrophic impact on the research facilities. And I think at this stage we need to alert the Minister with a red letter about how
seriously concerned we as a committee are on this issue.
Sir, just on this, if we were looking at 400 job losses in any town across Northern Ireland, or 2 or 3 towns across Northern Ireland, as a consequence of some business being in difficulties, you know, we'll be doing our best to try to ensure that we retain that. But you know, we're potentially going to lose 400 well-paid, highly skilled jobs in Northern Ireland, which has a knock-on effect on the agricultural industry as well. And I think what's being asked of AFBI is wholly unreasonable.
I agree.
You know, you said yourself it's disproportionate, but it's wholly unreasonable. And as an organisation, I believe that they're needed for the development of the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland. If we're to be the competitive industry, if we're seriously to do the going for growth, and if you're going to put us at the cutting edge of milk production and beef production, and well, right across the industry, then you know we're going to have that research and development. It's all very well getting the core work done, but the R&D element is the side that will actually ensure that the Northern Ireland industry is at that cutting edge.
I also, in their presentation, they told us that in the UK mainland and the Irish Republic are both increasing spending. I think that's something we should also highlight in our letter. I think we need a comprehensive letter done.
After doing work, for example, on the impact of agriculture on the environment and methane and all of that there, because at one stage the EU was wanting to have a 20% reduction in methane and so forth coming from agriculture, and I was involved in environment at the time and posed the question, well, what's methane is produced, or what's, because it was they were doing it just on the number of animals that we had. But if you actually look at production systems that you would have in the British Isles, as opposed to what you'd have in Europe, grass itself actually captures carbon. And if you have animals which are grazed outside, you inevitably have grass which is tramped back into the soil. So you actually have carbon capture. Now Europe was just doing a Europe-wide thing, as if everything was fed in a feedlot. All the land was ploughed, which releases carbon. Animals were kept in feedlots, which means that their slurries mixed on a regular basis. We inevitably would have a system which produces a lot less methane in the first instance.
And AFBI was able to prove that?
AFBI is doing work on that there to ensure that we in Northern Ireland don't end up having to take a 20% reduction, because that would be hugely damaging to the industry if we have to do that. You know, we'd have to reduce the herd sizes right across Northern Ireland. So They're absolutely critical to the well-being of the agricultural industry in Northern Ireland.
Absolutely. Any letter done, is it okay that the Chair and the Vice Chair clears that letter? Is that the procedure, or do you want brought? I think it needs to go as soon as possible to the Minister.
Yeah, I think
Happy enough with it?
Yeah. Rely on the clerk to compile a letter and we'll...
Is it okay? Okay. Okay. We'll move on to agenda item 6, committee discussion on EU priorities. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at pages 104 to 105? And the EU priorities template at pages 106 to 109. Correspondence on the issue from the OFM DFM committee is at pages 110 to 178. Can I advise members that the request for committee EU priorities is made annually by the OFM DFM committee. Therefore, the committee has been asked to submit what its 2015 priorities are, and a draft for this can be found at page 106 and 107. This suggests that the committee's priorities will continue to be overseeing the DARD implementation of CAP Pillar 1 and 2, and will as well as the common fisheries policy. The committee clerk has read through the rest of the EU Commission programme and suggested that the committee may wish to have a briefing from DARD on its EU programme other than CAP and CFP, to include a briefing on beef labelling rules and fishing authoritism regulations. Are members content with this approach? Okay. The committee actively for 2014 is also to be forwarded, and this can be found at page 109. Are members content? Agenda item 7, committee review TRIPSI position paper. And refer members to the memo from the clerk at page 180 and associated papers at page 181 to 200. Members will recall that the TRIPSI position paper and motion were agreed at last week's meeting, and the motion has now been laid in the Business Office with a date of debate anticipated to be the 2nd of March 2015. Can I seek agreement to forward the position paper to the Minister for her consideration prior to the debate? Okay.
Chair, sorry. You still looking 2nd of March?
Yeah, 2nd of March, yeah.
2nd?
Yeah. Okay. Can I also refer members to the draft press release which has been tabled? Comments from members? Everyone happy with it? Great. Members should note that the press release will issue prior to the debate. Okay. Agenda item 8, written briefing, outcome of joint DARD decal consultation on policy proposals for a fisheries bill. Can I refer members to the memo from the clerk at page 202, 203, and papers from the department at pages 204 to 273. Can I advise members that the proposed fisheries bill is a joint DARD decal proposal, and the formal consultation period has now ended with a total of 57 written responses being received. The proposed policy content of the bill can be found at pages 261 to 273. The Minister and her counterpart in DCAL plan to seek the approval of the Executive for the final policy proposals and the formal drafting of the bill, subject to the approval by the Executive and constraints of getting the bill drafted by the Office of Legislative Counsel. DARD anticipate that the bill will be introduced to the Assembly prior to the summer recess. Can I suggest, therefore, that we seek an oral briefing on the proposals at the meeting post-Easter? Everyone happy with that? Okay. Agenda item 9, oral briefing, update on remote sensing. Now, we're going into
This is the one.
public, this one's on public session, okay. Oral briefing, update on remote sensing. Can I advise members that the following briefing will be relevant to the remote sensing presentation scheduled for later in the meeting? Can I refer members to the research paper at page 275 and 280? Can I welcome, it's Mark's doing that, sorry, Mark Allen, Assembly Researcher. You're very welcome, Mark. And
thank you, Chair. Thank you, members. And I suppose it is, as you say, it's almost a contextual paper, this, in preparation for what you will be looking at later in closed session. And I suppose I do want to, really provide the context in a number of ways, both looking at the wider EU origins and usage of remote sensing in relation to CAP eligibility, as well just to really focus in on Northern Ireland, and then just to finish the paper, I really just have some information, I suppose, which provides almost an overview of how effective remote sensing has been, and maybe some of the actual comments that maybe might inform maybe some of your thoughts later on when Dard are up. So I suppose just to start on that in terms of the background, I realise some members weren't here in 2012. So I mean, remote sensing, in its simplest terms, I suppose, is really the process of using either space-based satellite or aerial imagery captured by aircraft to examine features such as land use. I suppose where it's particularly interesting in relation to the work of the ARD Committee is in the context of the single farm payment process, where remote sensing is really used across various EU member states to determine the eligibility of claims made by landowners. I suppose it's also fair to say that there has been an increasing adoption of remote sensing technology over the last 10-15 years, maybe even up to 20 in fact, and that has really been driven by a desire to make farm inspections linked to the single farm payment system quicker to complete and more cost effective, but while still ensuring that payments are made to those entitled to them and for the correct amounts. Just as a bit of information as well, the actual information, the raw data for the remote sensing, particularly in the form of the satellite data, this actually is sourced from an organisation called the Joint Research Centre, which is effectively the European Commission's in-house science service. And they set the technical standards that Dard and others have to adhere to, as well as, they said, providing the data, the raw data. So very briefly then, just in terms of an EU level, like I said, the part of the CAP single farm payment, basic payment schemes, all EU member states have a particular responsibility, and that really is to ensure that there are no duplicate claims on the same piece of land. Now, I suppose the basis for the use of remote sensing, I have there the actual Commission regulation. It was EEC number 3887, that was 1992, and that laid down the detailed rules for the use of remote sensing technology. And I suppose it was really within the auspices, a term that members will be well aware with, the requirement for integrated administration and control systems. So that's really where remote sensing as a support to the land parcel identification system fits in the work that we are actually looking at today. And as you're well aware, LIPIS, as we would generally refer to it, forms a critical element of Pillar 1. And I suppose it's all farmers in Northern Ireland, and indeed yourselves as members, are well aware of the issues that come with it. I suppose just very briefly, just to touch upon, in order to meet the requirements of LIPIS, all member states are required to develop control mechanisms which really check farmer compliance. And I suppose there's two ways that is actually done through the control mechanisms. There's administrative cross-checks, which are done on 100% of applications. And then there are these on-the-spot checks of a sample of applicant farms. Those are done at least 5% of total farmers claiming direct subsidies are effectively assessed. There's obviously an element in of how that's broken down. It's made up of a random selection and there's a risk-based selection. Initially, within the EU, on-the-spot checks could only be completed by physical inspection. In terms of that obviously added to costs, but since 1992, as I said, there has been this provision to use remote sensing data. It's also notable that really the number of states, as I mentioned, on an EU-wide basis who have utilised this data has grown. I mean, if you go back to 2010, there's a paper I referenced there, of the 690,000 EU-wide CAP eligibility checks, 61% of those were done actually using remote sensing. That was back in 2010, and that was projected, that was 2009, it was projected to rise to 70% in 2010. Turning to Northern Ireland specifically, I think it's fair to say that in EU terms, we've been quite late to the game in terms of our use of remote sensing. I know many members will be aware of that from the time this came before the committee in 2012, for those who were here. And I suppose that was really 2012 was our first year that we used remote sensing. At that point, it was a pilot for 250 eligibility inspections. Dard's, I suppose, decision to finally use remote sensing was largely driven, I think, by a wish to make the single farm payment inspection process quicker, more efficient, and by default that would have meant that farmers would have received their payments more quickly. The actual work involved in the collection of the data, the analysis of data, was conducted by an actual external contractor. That's a group known as the ICON Group, based in Dublin. They were contracted in 2012, and it's my understanding that they continue to have the contract.
Just in terms of a bit of information, this is taken actually from an AQW. In 2013, the Icon Group was actually paid a total of £93,115 for their work in this area. Turning very quickly then to the actual mechanics of how remote sensing is conducted. As I said, the Icon Group really make use of satellite imagery provided by the EU's Joint Research Centre. I suppose for the purpose, and I know Dard will probably touch upon this later, for the purpose of the imagery data, Northern Ireland is split into 4 so-called zones. You have a north-east zone, a north-west zone, a south-east zone and a south-west zone. Each one of those zones is made up of 9 individual tiles, and each zone covers about 596 square kilometres. In 2012, Dard selected, it was actually from 1 of the 4 zones. 2013 was 2 of the 4 zones, and for 2014 was all 4 zones. So that's effectively those farms that are selected for remote sensing are selected. As I said, I suppose in terms of Dard is bound by EU regulation to carry out 5% or eligibility checks on 5% of single farm payment recipients. Dard breaks that down as well, as it's required. 3.75% of cases are selected randomly, and 1.25% are on an at-risk basis. It has to be said as well that farms that are subject to remote sensing inspections are selected on an at-risk basis, so they aren't selected randomly. And the other thing I just wanted to emphasise is that the criteria utilised for the selection of those remote sensing at-risk inspections are the same as those that are used for the at-risk physical on-the-spot inspections. Very quickly, there can be instances where the eligibility of a farm can be questioned, and I think Dard will focus on this because this is obviously where this can cause issues or create questions. There can be simply an issue where the satellite or aerial image data is unclear or maybe insufficient to make a dedicated call, and in that instance Dard staff are required to go out and conduct a rapid field visit. It's not a full inspection, it's designed to be as quick as they can do it, as efficient as they can do it, to actually check questions raised through an assessment of the data, the image data. I just put in there a table 1 on page 278 of the paper there, which gives you an idea in terms of how remote sensing inspections have actually risen in terms of the percentage that they make up now of the total inspections required. So you went from 13% in 2012 to up to 2014 it was 71% of our required eligibility inspections were done by remote sensing. And as you can see as well there, the actual overall payment percentage achieved has actually risen over that period as well. So I think it's, remote sensing is clearly having an impact. Just very quickly on the effectiveness of remote sensing, as I touched upon earlier, there was a paper I'd done on this in 2012, and I just included some of the information from that. Really, we're looking at the Republic of Ireland and Wales. I suppose the interesting things to come out of it, and I'll summarise these very quickly. There was a recognition, I think, in both Wales and the Republic of Ireland that remote sensing had made their systems more efficient, more cost-effective as well. Particularly in the Republic of Ireland, I was able to get a figure at that time that the average cost of a physical on-farm inspection visit was about €1,800, as opposed to remote sensing, which was between €60 and €70. So it gives you an idea as to that this was a cheaper system. We were at that point as well, I have to say, in both jurisdictions there was a keenness to move forward in terms of how remote sensing data could be used for wider application. For example, maybe in terms of cross-compliance checks. I suppose particularly pertinent maybe in terms of where we're at now with greening requirements as well. But the other thing I suppose which that there was maybe a sense in both jurisdictions at that point, there was maybe a bit of nervousness. A lot of positives but some nervousness about going forward, how Court of Auditors or such like would look at the use of remote sensing systems. Did that leave maybe, were they as good or as accurate as physical inspections? Did that maybe raise the spectre of disallowance? Those were concerns. The only other thing that I wanted to add just in closing was the PwC review of the Rural Payments Agency, which was completed really on DEFRA's behalf in 2010. And I mean, it highlights a number of things. Remote sensing was identified as a more cost-effective form of inspection. But there were obviously elements which were picked out there in terms of some of the difficulties around, as I said, these unclear instances that require effectively a rapid field visit. There's also, I suppose, as you can see there, PwC made the point that remote sensing has the potential to be a very cost-effective tool, but it is currently used in a suboptimal way. So maybe there are questions around, are we making the best use of remote sensing data? Could we apply it to other areas? Could there be a more targeted approach, and what would be the benefits from that? But at the back of this, there is the final general concluding point is that there are some stakeholders who believe, as I say, that land eligibility inspection needs an actual physical on-the-spot inspection, and that depending on the nature of the system that you have, if there are problems identified further down the line, as I said, does that leave you open to the risk of disallowance? That's all, Chair, I want to really say at this point, and I appreciate, I want to emphasise again, it was a contextual piece, so it's, if it leads to further work, happy to do so in a more specific and Northern Ireland maybe focus.
Thank you very much, Mark. As usual, your detailed presentation is very useful. In your research, has there been any indication that there are any major issues with remote sensing anywhere else?
It's hard to pick up, Chair, because in terms of evaluation, the ones I suppose I really relied on were the Republic of Ireland and the Wales from 2012. The only other one that we could really have in the time that we looked at this was the DEFRA one. We weren't really finding, for example, even the Court of Auditors' opinion on it. I think the general consensus is, from what we could find, it's a good idea. But there maybe are variations, and this is maybe something that you might want to touch upon, as to how actual countries have developed their systems. So there are some countries are very stringent in their systems, and maybe some suggestion have been quicker to get their system in operation. Does that leave them open to greater risk?
See, in one of your figures that in the Republic of Ireland, a field visit by manually done costs about €1,800, whereas estimated that remote sensing costs 60 to 70 euros.
Yes.
Is that, you know how that is replicated in Northern Ireland? Are we seeing similar?
It's a question, to be honest, that DARD would be in a better position to answer. And I suppose the other thing I want to say, just in relation to maybe a bit more contextual information on that figure, is the 60 to 70 euro, we were unclear at the time as to whether that, I suspect it didn't include if a rapid field visit was required.
Yeah, I would understand that. Yeah.
So, I mean,
the basic, yeah.
It gives, I mean, it's an indicative figure rather than a full breakdown of it. But I mean, DARD may well be able to give you.
There's a massive difference.
Yes.
Somebody else?
Yeah. Just say the system that's used. You talked about the 250 farms in the Clocher area and North Antrim area, which led to most of those people not getting their payments till about June the following year, as opposed to December.
I think I'm maybe not in a position to comment, because I suppose what I've used in this is information in the public domain. But I think what I would say is I'd actually asked DARD and I got the information, but it came a wee bit late to include it in this paper, but I think DARD actually indicated to me when I asked for it that they will be covering this today in relation to the impact of how many of those remote sensing eligibility checks required a rapid field visit, and what impact, if any, that would have upon the time required for payment. So that, I think it's fair to say, is probably the area that members have heard of before that has maybe led to particular complications in particular areas. But as I say, DARD, I think, are better placed to actually give you the actual data on that, and I think that was their intention, that they have that information.
Yeah.
Okay. Anyone else? You don't have it? Mark, thank you very much again. Mark.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Turn to agenda item 10, correspondence. Can I refer members to the correspondence received at pages 283 to 296. This is the only item of correspondence this week, and it is from the OFM-DFM Committee in respect of the committee stage of the Children's Services Cooperation Bill. Do members wish to make a submission on the clauses of the bill, or are you content to note? If members wish to make a submission, then they should indicate the detail of the submission so that the clerk can draft a paper. Can I also suggest that it is forwarded to DARD for comment, with particular reference to the launch of the consultation of the DARD Children Young People Action Plan 2014-17 that we are due to hear about on the 10th of March. Okay, everyone happy with that? Okay. Agenda item 11, forward work programme. Can I refer members to the draft forward work programme at pages 298 to 301. Can I advise members that the written briefing on the public consultation on the proposed amendment to TB examination and testing scheme order Northern Ireland 1999 has been deferred to a later date at the request of the Department. The department has also requested that the oral briefing on the draft bovine viral diarrhea order 2014 has been rescheduled from 24th of February 2015 to the 10th of March 2015 at the request again of the department. Can I advise members that that next week the only item on the agenda in the executive questioning techniques scheduled to commence at 2:45 p.m. I would encourage all members to attend and participate in this training session as it has been arranged for some time. Can I seek agreement for the forward work programme? Yep. Okay. Item 12, any other business? Any other business? Orders? No. And item 13, date and time of next meeting. The next meeting of the Committee of Agriculture and Rural Development will take place on the 24th of February 2015 at 2:45 in room 30. Okay, we now move into closed session.
Room 30. This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 30.